Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, May 9th, 2024. I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Hey, Abe, is this the turn against Israel?
I think the turn might be coming.
You think? Because as people who listen to the podcast know, we have on occasion taking the temperature of Joe Biden's relationship to Israel and its conduct in the war against Hamas, have had disagreements about whether or not this or that or the other moment constituted that special period of time in every American presidency when support for a justified Israeli action of self-defense against a terrorist entity becomes too much for the presidency to bear, and that the president or his people then inform Israel that time is up and it's really past the moment when Israel needs to retrench and leave things as they are. But this thing that happened yesterday in the interview with Aaron Burnett on CNN, President of the United States, 16 Minutes with Aaron Burnett, this has a different quality to it, doesn't it, Abe?
Well, it does, and I'm trying to put my finger on it because he was articulate. Well, I use the word
articulating
inadvisedly, articulating a policy that was already there, but so what made it different about what he said? And I agree. It had a different quality. Obama's attitude toward Israel was constantly punitive, and this had that about it, right?
Right.
This was right.
Well, so Obama was hostile to Israel from the jump, right? I mean, he said, I'm gonna separate myself from Israel. I'm gonna show tough love.
Right.
His first trip was to Egypt, right? He talked about Islamic charity, all of that stuff. So Biden is not that, but what Biden did yesterday by announcing to the world that he would withhold massive amounts of the aid package that he himself championed for 6 months if Israel proceeded with its final effort to stamp out Hamas, arguably is the worst thing that an American president has ever done to Israel. I mean, two previous presidencies, the Reagan presidency with Caspar Weinberger as Secretary of Defense, and the first H.W. Bush presidency with James Baker as Secretary of State, both took aggressive actions against Israel. Weinberger held up certain arms shipments similar to what's happening now, and James Baker withheld loan guarantees, complicated story, as an effort to pressure Israel into going to the negotiating table at the Madrid conference after the first Gulf War. This has an entirely different quality to my mind because Biden championed an aid package and now is essentially, as the Wall Street Journal says, imposing an arms embargo on his own arms package.
Which contravenes the will of Congress, by the way, because the representative institution of the United States has written into law that we're going to supply our ally Israel. It's funny, just as we began the show, I received one of those, AI generated fundraising solicitations over email that have those always very over the top and semi-desperate subject headings like, donate to my campaign or else I'm going to jump off a bridge, or, I'm miserable and lonely. Won't you help me out by contributing $5 to my campaign? Well, this one just came across the transom from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and the subject line read, "I'm getting sick of this." And I saw that, and before deleting it, said to myself, that sums up my attitude exactly. I just want to speak about how
I didn't know you were an AI. Now I'm learning something new here.
Well, no, I mean it's the AI generated
Yes,
headline.
but I'm just saying that
Yes.
you and the AI are now in agreement.
We're complete sympathetic.
We have achieved the singularity.
We're in complete sympathy. We're both sick of this. You point out, John, in your great piece on the commentary website this morning, that the policy is so bizarre because not only does it come after Congress passed the aid, not only does it come a day after his Holocaust Remembrance Day speech, where he talked about the awfulness of anti-Semitism and how America should combat it, but it makes no sense logically, right? How will preventing Israel from having the precision munitions it needs to go in and defeat Hamas and Rafah, how will preventing that from happening help the hostages? There are still hostages. Chris Van Hollen is saying, if we go into Rafah, if Israel goes into Rafah, this is the senator from Maryland who's really turned anti-Israel in recent years. Chris Van Hollen saying, if Israel goes into Rafah, we won't be able to help the hostages. Well, by not going into Rafah, what incentive does Hamas have? What leverage is being put up against Hamas to enter into the negotiations? Because Hamas is being preserved. So that's the other thing. By preventing an operation in Rafah, how is Hamas threatened? Biden started this whole thing back after October 7th, saying that Hamas is like ISIS. Now he's letting it survive. And finally, how is preventing these munitions from going to Israel helping the civilians? The civilians in Palestine, in Gaza, the Palestinian civilians, they are human shields. They're being used as pawns, in many cases willingly used as pawns, in order to insulate the Hamas leadership from deadly reprisal. If you don't give them the Israelis the precision munitions, then that means Israel will have to use dumb bombs. It means that the war will go on longer, and that means more civilians killed. In almost every axis, which I just laid out, these 3 points, Biden is helping a terrorist organization bent on Israel's destruction.
He didn't. It's also, I just think it's important that we note, because he rarely gives such interviews, and as president, he didn't mention Hamas by name during the CNN interview, and he didn't once mention the 130 hostages. So that, I think, that's very telling. He's gone from right after October 7th saying, Hamas is ISIS, to now not even mentioning it by name.
Also in the interview, I just say, also in the interview, he couldn't think of the word Iran. He said, we're talking about offensive weapons. We will continue to help Israel, defend itself from a flurry of bombs that are trying to destroy it. He said, like the attack recently from recently. He couldn't remember Iran. But I also want to point out that he's withholding weapons from Israel, who is fighting a terrorist group that is currently holding American citizens. That is unprecedented.
Whose names he never says. He never says their names.
Matt, you mentioned the Holocaust speech. We are told that the decision to enact this policy, withholding policy, took place last week and was held, though it leaked, but it was held as an official matter so that it wouldn't interfere with Biden's emotionally resonant speech about the Holocaust and threats to Jews. He did mention Hamas in that speech. I'm going to read what he said, and then we can all react to it. Now, here we are, not 75 years later, but just 7.5 months later, and people are already forgetting. They're already forgetting that Hamas unleashed this terror, that it was Hamas that brutalized Israelis, that it was Hamas who took and continues to hold hostages. I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget. And as Jews around the world still cope with the atrocities and trauma of that day and its aftermath, We've seen a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world, vicious propaganda on social media, Jews forced to hide their kippahs under baseball hats, tuck their Jewish stars into their shirts on college campuses, Jewish students blocked, harassed, attacked while walking to class, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic posters, slogans calling for the annihilation of Israel, the world's only Jewish state. Too many people denying, downplaying, rationalizing, ignoring the horrors of the Holocaust on October 7th, including Hamas's appalling use of sexual violence to torture and terrorize Jews. It's absolutely despicable, and it must stop. Applause. So what he has now done is an act of policy designed to let Hamas not stop. This is a policy to let Hamas survive, to freeze the conflict in place, to convince Israel either not to go into Rafah or to make it clear that America will lead some kind of a vague emotional coalition against the value of what Israel will be doing in Rafah, though he will not, I don't think, will turn against Israel rhetorically, publicly in the way that, say Jim Baker did when he said, call me at the White House when you want peace, or whatever it was he said.
Well, it is only May, John, and he's president until January, at least.
Yeah. So. Okay. So, but my point is, gave a speech on Tuesday in which he said, Hamas is evil. Hamas has done this. Hamas must, this must stop. So what the hell is going on here? This isn't just speaking out of two sides of your mouth. You are committing yourself to a moral obligation to prevent existential threats to the Jewish people based on the recent history of the world and its relationship to Jews. And then as they are on the verge of doing what they can to end this specific threat in this specific way, you are interceding to prevent them from doing that. Are they asking us to go fight for them, Israel? No. Did they want this aid? Yes. Do they need this aid for the purposes of winning the war? Well, the answer is going to be no, because they're going to win this war, and they're going to do it, I guess, without some aspects of the American aid. It's just going to be bloodier, longer, and more devastating, both to the Palestinian civilians whom he supposedly is trying to protect, and to the noble Israeli forces that are going to go and risk their lives to save, protect, and help their own country. And finally, in political terms, why is he prolonging the conflict when he's got to go into election in November? Why wouldn't he want to give Israel every most precise piece of weaponry and armament and that he could possibly do so that Israel can finish this up in 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and then he can turn somewhere else? He can even say this to them and say, you know what? I know you want to go into Lebanon because you need to do something about the threat to Lebanon. Now I'm going to ask you not to do that until after November, because I need a period of quiet and calm, and I've given you what you wanted. Now we can't even do that, and they're not. And he has now created a political dynamic inside Israel in which Bibi Netanyahu has to go into Rafah now, all guns blazing. Otherwise, he will look like a eunuch and basically a cat's paw for Biden. And so Biden has committed a self-defeating political, geopolitical, geostrategic act here. And I need some reporting out of the White House, because, the White House press corps is just so good at letting us know what's really going on inside the White House. That's just, that we just had the White House Correspondents' Dinner where they all patted each other on the back for the
They're still looking for the source
coverage.
of the cocaine, John. They're very busy. They're trying to find the source of that cocaine.
Well, we do have some reporting from the Congress, which I thought was interesting. This morning, in Politico, there was an interview with Speaker Johnson, who just survived this stupid and futile gesture on the part of Marjorie Taylor Greene to unseat him. And Ryan Lizza and his colleague asked Johnson, what do you think about this announcement by Biden on CNN that he's going to withhold weapons from Israel if they cross his red line in Rafah? Speaker Johnson said, well, I think it might be a senior moment because just a day earlier, I was in a skiff hearing from administration officials the actual opposite. Now, is that kind of Johnson?
A skiff, just so we explain, a skiff is a secure compartmentalized intelligence facility. It's where you go to have the highest level conversations without any possibility that it will be bugged or that anybody will overhear.
And if you're Joe Biden, it's where you take the documents from and put them in your garage or in your office in DC. So Johnson may have just been tweaking Biden and raising the age issue. But on the other hand, it could also be that there's genuine confusion within the administration about the policy. The policy is itself rather amorphous because despite the fact that there's the confirmation from Lloyd Austin that certain weapons have been held, Biden was more prospective in saying, if Israel violates my red lines, then I'm going to withhold even more ordnance. So there's that quality to it. It's also that just, I think, worth taking a step back and marveling at the idea of drawing red lines around our allies. I mean, think about that. It's the whole point of a red line is to lay down a rule for the adversary. In this case, Biden is doing it for Israel. And his red lines anyway were already meaningless because remember him saying to Iran, don't, I have one word for Iran, don't think about attacking Israel. And then Iran attacked Israel. All of the pressure is put on our friends and not our enemies. And that's both a kind of a moral stain on the president and a totally bankrupt foreign policy.
Well, and the fiction that this is for humanitarian reasons, which I think is still the sort of the thin veil he's draping over this most recent action, is not going to hold. I mean, there was an interesting poll about how many Democrats think that Biden is not progressive enough, which is basically a large coalition that we hear from in the media, but in fact is only around 11% of Democrats. So there are only 11% of Democrats think Joe Biden's just way too centrist or not progressive enough, not anti-Israel enough in particular. And yet that's kind of steering policy right now for him, whether that's as a result of the conflicts on campus or he's worried about the upcoming convention. I'm not sure, but placating those people by draping this, humanitarian gauze over a very bad policy, a potentially illegal policy, if I'm not mistaken, right? He's required by law to spend the money. I don't know how it was specified he spend it. So I guess he could say only defensive weapons, not offensive weapons, but he has to spend that money. That's the law. So and as I'm sure we've talked about several times here, it was the exact pretext for impeaching Donald Trump about aid to Ukraine in his term.
Look, I think there's no question that this means that, Biden is all in on the Michigan plan, on the trying to get the pro-Hamasis on his side no matter what. There's no pivot coming. There's not going to be like a revelation here. That maybe he's made a mistake. He's obviously he's obviously doubling down, and I agree with Matt as he says this is only May. If this is where he has planted his flag as of this point, I think we can expect more of policy like this, especially because, as John says, Bibi has to go in, and once that happens, God knows what Biden's going to start saying and doing.
I'm desperately trying to find this quote this morning, and for some reason I'm having a brain meltdown. A senior White House official, I thought, would talk to Jewish Insider, but it doesn't seem to be on Jewish Insider, explaining that what Biden means when he says he will never not support Israel and he loves Israel and he's always going to support Israel is Iron Dome. he means
No, that was in Jewish Insider, an unnamed official. Yeah,
that
he said it
wasn't
still
Jewish Insider. Okay, I'm
still
having
ironclad.
if okay, I
Do you want me to read you the quote?
Yeah, please.
He says,
yeah,
okay,
go
so
ahead.
he said after Biden's interview, the official argued there's a distinction between giving Israel access to defensive weapons versus offensive weapons. Here's the quote. It's ironclad to Israel's security, right? They need Iron Dome defense systems. You can argue that they don't need a 2,000-pound unguided munition in order to defend themselves, the official said. He is drawing a distinction in the interview between defensive weapons, which he will always support, and some types of offensive weapons, for instance, the 500-pound, 1,000-pound unguided munitions that Israel would use in a Rafah operation if they decided to move forward with that. This is someone, by the way, who clearly doesn't understand war at all, the way that he's talking about me, in my opinion. But
the United States supported Israel, helped Israel develop Iron Dome, helps resupply Iron Dome. Israel has 3 levels of defensive support in the air, right? There's David's sling, there's, Goliath's hammer and Thor's hammer, and there's Iron Dome. And they each do different things, and they were all shown to remarkable effect in responding to the Iranian attack. And Iron Dome, of course, has had this miraculous quality to it when it was really totally unveiled in 2014, and 4,500 missiles shot or rockets shot from Gaza at Israel were almost all intercepted and made harmless. And rather like the football helmet, the introduction of the football helmet may have led to an increase in concussion and injury because it allows people to believe that they are safer than they are in fact are on a football field taking hits. Iron Dome inadvertently contributed to Hamas's triumph on October 7th.
The risk compensation effect is what it's called.
Exactly. That Israel believed that it had Hamas deterred defensively, but it didn't. And so what the Biden official here seems to suggest is that as long as Israel remains entirely in a defensive posture toward threats to it, that's not a controversial problem because nobody's getting their hands dirty. Missiles are being fired and they're magically shot down. And no, there is no question that this was an extraordinary development that allowed Israel, in part, over the last 10 years, to grow its economy almost double the size of its economy. Nonetheless, Israel now faces an understanding that it found itself in a category error, which is that you can deter a force by simply knocking down its projectiles, and maybe they have other ideas in mind. You say, okay, the sky is no longer open to you as a way of hurting us. So what did Hamas do? It said, well, we can sneak attack on the ground and we can hide underground and now try to come and get us. And that the American thinking inside the White House, whoever this person is, or the American official, whoever that is, that it has not evolved, is itself horrifying, simply as a matter of elementary logic and who you want running your country's foreign and military policy. Because that's as though there was nothing to learn from what happened. And what is the phrase that Biden uses and everybody uses on Holocaust, on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day? Never again. Well, never again is now, and never again is Hamas has to be destroyed because it has figured out ways to evade Israeli deterrence.
Right. Well, the Biden addendum to never again is never again so long as it's convenient. And it's inconvenient for Biden.
And also, I often forget in Biden's case.
Israel's defense is inconvenient for him. And he believes that the ramifications of the war globally, whether it's the Arab states, whether it's the Europeans, the ramifications at home with the protests in Michigan, with the Arab American vote there. It's all very inconvenient for him. And so he has moved 180 degrees from his position after October 7th. And, I was just put in mind as I was agog at the statement last night of something that Michael Oren has been saying, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, noted historian of the Middle East. And Michael Oren has been traveling around the world since October 7th, and he is often asked about politics. And it is true that politics is the main way the pro-Israel community can support Israel outside of Israel itself, right? If you're an American member of the pro-Israel community, it has to be through politics here. So Oren tells audiences that there are 5 questions he asks when evaluating politicians or candidates. The first question: which candidate rejects a permanent unconditional ceasefire imposed on Israel? Question 2: which candidate is determined to confront Iran? Question 3: which candidate will defend Israel in international courts? Question 4: which candidate opposes the unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state? And finally, question 5: which candidate commits to Israel's military resupply? And we now have an answer on that last question, and it is not an answer favorable to Joe Biden.
There's also, I think, another through line here with Joe Biden's presidency, and it started at the very beginning. And we've talked about it off and on, not just with regard to foreign policy, but his domestic policy too, certainly his economic policies. And that's once again, and actually, Matt, it's the way you said that, like, oh, this is inconvenient for Biden. That's actually where the media's role here is very telling. They treat any crisis, even the crisis of the administration's own making, as something that happens to Joe Biden, not something Joe Biden caused. And we've seen this again and again. Inflation is happening to Biden. Oh, what to do? And that passivity, which served him well when he ran against Donald Trump by hiding in his basement and never coming out and saying anything, can't work anymore. The entire world feels like it's on the edge of something terrible happening. I mean, and I'm an optimist, and I'm saying that. So it's the instability, both at home and abroad, affects people's temperament about what they need from their leaders. And we're still getting from this administration, from this White House, and from this press corps, well, don't blame him. I mean, he's the adult in the room still. It's just all happening to him. That doesn't fly anymore.
There is a quote going around last night. It's a little bit of a too good to check thing, though. We know it happened. We know the confrontation took place. It dates back to 1982. And it is a closed door meeting between senators in the midst of Israel's, I think it was actually before Lebanon. I don't quite have the date here. But Time magazine reported this. There was a closed door meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and senators. Robert Packwood, then the liberal Republican senator from Washington State or Oregon? Washington, right? Paul Tsongas was there, the liberal senator, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and Joe Biden was there. And Joe Biden apparently, at the age of 11 or 60, depending on how old you think he was, but he was 39 and had never served in a military or done much of anything except opened his mouth to Menachem Begin and said, "You better change your policies or, America is going to turn on you and withhold aid and all of that." And this is what lore has it that Begin said to Biden. Apparently he did turn heel on Biden and give him a tongue lashing. Remember, Menachem Begin did tours in jail in Soviet prisons before managing to get his way to Israel, where he then fought for 6 years in the War of Independence and then spent 30 years as a backbencher in the Israeli government before finally this is one of the toughest people who lived in the 20th century. And this pipsqueak moron junior senator from Delaware is giving him a lecture. And this is what Begin is reputed to have said. Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid. It will not work. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid. Now, this is as I say, this is a sort of it's like a Pericles' funeral oration. Like there's no transcript of this remarkable piece of confrontational rhetoric coming from the actually extraordinarily eloquent and very brilliant Begin, who is that is not his reputation, but as our columnist Stali Soloveichik is fond of saying, Begin was the most underestimated man of the 20th century in many ways. And it's 42 years later, and Biden is now president of the United States, and every single word that Begin said here is now applicable with him as president. Israel will now go it alone in Rafah, if necessary, and it will do what is necessary to defend and protect itself with or without our aid. Our aid was intended to not only express moral and logistical support, moral support because Israel was attacked in this existential way by terrorist forces, understood and should be understood given everything that's going on college campuses to be a mortal enemy to the United States as well. Ideologically and programmatically, and that Israel is just one aspect of its level of hatred. It hates the United States as well and would do things to the United States were it capable of doing so, similar to what it did to Israel. But that's the logistical, that's the moral support. The logistical support is, okay, look, the Middle East is a cesspool and there's one functioning democracy and it is attacked. It's not doing that. These are not wars of choice. Like it's getting attacked. We provide logistical support because if Israel can bring Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran into a state of deterrence, peaceful shipping through the Straits of Hormuz and in the Gulf and in the Red Sea and everywhere, all of that is a real thing that we can then rely on that somehow has now been compromised. And we are complementary democracies with very much in common and a commitment to ideas about freedom and I would even say the biblical sources of our ideas about freedom and human rights and all of that. And yet here is the president of the United States 42 years after thinking that he was in a moral position to take the upper hand with Begin, saying what he is saying. And so Israel will go it alone. And then Israel will win. And as I keep saying, I've said this now for like 4 months since Abe first said, this is the turn against Israel. If Biden is on Israel's side and Biden wins, Biden gets credit. If Israel wins, despite what happens here, not only doesn't Biden get credit, but I want to read this one thing that Ryan Grimm, the very left-wing, very, very left-wing, I think he's at The Intercept now, but he was at the Huffington Post for many, many years. Ryan Grimm said, I should have ponied it up here because then I could do this more fluently, so I apologize. Let me find it. Where's the Ryan Grimm quote? Why is my internet down?
At the bottom of your piece.
I know, but my internet is down. So I can't even get to my own piece.
I can read you the quote.
Okay, you read the quote.
I got to read the quote right here. I have it right here. As you write, John, in your piece, must read. The radical journalist Ryan Grimm put out a tweet that encapsulates the Biden catastrophe perfectly. And now you are quoting Ryan Grimm. Quote. The irony is that Biden, after losing the support of everyone who opposed what Israel has been doing, will now lose the support of everyone who loves what Israel's doing. Close quote. He's alienating everyone. But I will say this. Matt Duss, the former Bernie Sanders aide, who's a professional anti-American foreign policy guy these days, and Chris Van Hollen and some of the other members of the progressive caucuses in the House and Senate, they liked what Biden is doing. They cheered this. They expect more of it. So maybe Biden is thinking he needs to shore up his left, and he's willing to cut loose all the people who are pro-Israel and who were giving him the benefit of the doubt prior to May 8th.
I mean, I do wonder. I was just thinking how the many big think pieces we had during Trump's term about how his narcissism, which is real, affected his ability to be a good leader. Right? Did it mean that he was, unstable? Did it mean he was vindictive? All these things. Remember, there were a million pieces about his narcissism. No one's written about Joe Biden's vanity, because that Begin story and what we're describing here is very much an expression of his vanity, his irritable vanity, which actually gets him into positions that he then can't withdraw from because he's quite defensive about them.
Think about the Afghan pullout.
Exactly. I was
think about his response to the Hur report.
Right. Exactly. Just the vanity
and stupidity.
Yes,
I mean, just really dumb person.
Well, okay, so let's go to the dumbness, because I don't. It's broken record time, but what can you do? We're talking about the same topic. We're trapped here, like the cast of characters in Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, unable to leave the room, and hell is other people, and so we are having the same conversation.
Except you guys, like you're not hell.
or it's like
a Zoom room.
Like the Seinfeld 4, being in the jail at the end of the final episode, just going through the same old material that they've been doing for 9 years. A much reviled ending, I believe, but I thought was actually surreally brilliant. Anyway, that's sort of where we are since we've been having this conversation since October 7th. But how does this help him? What is the political calculus here? We talked about this yesterday. That's why I'm going back to this. If you do the math on the youth vote, right, it's about 800,000 people, according to the polling, that view this as the number one issue that concerns them. People on college campuses between the ages of 18 and 22. 800,000 people. It's 100,000 people in Dearborn, Michigan. We have polling that shows that 80% of Americans support Israel and only 20% support Hamas. I understand that Chris Van Hollen, who is the son of Arabists at the State Department and the CIA, and is himself a very questionable character, senator from Maryland, loves attacks on Israel and would like Israel destroyed. I know the Squad wants them destroyed. I know that these campus protesters want Israel destroyed. I don't see any evidence that the American people writ large, with whom he needs to have a mind meld in order to achieve the 75 to 85 million votes he has to score in order to win this election, view this matter in a way, any way remotely like they do. First of all, they either don't care, but if they're made to care, are they walking around going, this is really terrible? I mean, Jose Andres' World Food Propaganda organ got bombed. Do they know what that is? Do they care? They don't care. You know what again, age-wise, what do they remember? Iran attack, the Arab embargo of 73 and 79, Iran hostage taking, Saddam Hussein takes Kuwait, World Trade Center bombing, Khobar Towers bombing, 9/11. There are 200 million Americans who have a ready memory of not liking the people that Biden now seems to be kowtowing to. How is this a prudent political calculation?
It's not, but I think there's another contributing factor in Biden's making this decision, and it's not unrelated to Christine's point about his vanity. I think from Biden's perspective and some people in the administration, they are very concerned that the problem publicly, politically, is that people don't think Biden is effective, that he's capable of doing anything, of asserting himself on the facts on the changing facts on the ground. That he is, as Matt and the rest of us have described, just sort of drifting from place to place, mumbling, and then going on to the next place. So I think there's a desperation to enact policy, to do something, to make it look like he is seizing this, taking control of it one way or the other. I think that's part of what got him into the Afghanistan jam as well. So I think this was a you have to look like you are doing something, sir, moment.
And it's never you have to do something to help America and her allies. What did he do to the Afghans? He let the Taliban reconquer the country, and 13 U.S. servicemen died in the process. What has he done in Ukraine? Well, he's telling Ukraine what not to do all the time. We're not going to give you this weapon platform, only to often reverse himself several months later. Ukraine, don't hit Russian oil assets because we don't want the price of gasoline to increase anymore in the United States during an election year. Now it's Israel, don't go into Rafah. If you go into Rafah, I'm not going to give you the tools you need to finish the job of eliminating Hamas and free whatever hostages remain. It's always no to our allies. It's never no to the adversary. Or when he says it no to the adversary, like he did with Iran, as I mentioned, no one takes him seriously. So Israel shouldn't take him seriously either.
So let's shift gears and talk a little about his rival, because it's not like Donald Trump has covered himself in glory the way I would say Mike Johnson and Mitch McConnell have, oddly enough, after in Johnson's case, after a lot of maneuvering, have covered themselves in glory as internationalists supporting causes that we need, not only Israel but Ukraine as well. Trump is pretty much standing on the sidelines, not wanting to be. He's leading from behind. Obviously, I think if he really didn't like what they were doing, he would send out a truth on Truth Social and scare them, and then they might do something else. So the fact that he's not doing that suggests implicit support, but he is not looking at this and saying, this is an issue I want to go out in front and say Joe Biden shouldn't be president again because look at the way he's treating Israel. He says it a little bit. He doesn't say it a lot. He's got other things on his mind. What difference would it make were Trump politically and maybe even sort of internationally if he did say the other week, look, Israel needs to go in and win this war fast now. It's got to do it now. I feel like he's got a free shot to do that. He needs to be a counterpoint to the president. That's what you do when you're running an election campaign against an incumbent. You say he's doing this wrong, he's doing that wrong, he's doing the other thing wrong. Bring me in, and at least I'm going to do things differently. Why isn't he doing that?
He did release a statement just late last night or this morning that maybe we should read.
Okay, I did not know that. So
I'm going to read it right here. Once again, my high-speed internet.
Amazing.
Calling up the information at the snap of my fingers.
Finger. Yes.
Yes. Here it is. Truth from Donald Trump. Okay, that's the wrong one. That's sorry. That's the wrong one.
You know what?
No.
All right, you walked right into that.
I had generative AI there.
I had two screens. Here's the other one. Crooked Joe Biden, whether he knows it or not, Trump just said he will withhold weapons from Israel as they fight to eradicate Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Hamas murdered thousands of innocent civilians, including babies, and are still holding Americans hostage if the hostages are still alive. Yet Crooked Joe is taking the side of the terrorists, just like he has sided with the radical mobs taking over our college campuses because his donors are funding them. And then he went on in the statement to say, as he has said for months, said October 7th when it had happened. had he been president. So Trump is making a political issue out of it, at least on Truth Social, and he probably will in other contexts. Of course, he has to spend the rest of the day-to-day stuck in a courtroom listening to Stormy Daniels. And so the Biden Democrat strategy of sidelining Trump, at least for 4 days out of the week, will prevent him from making a more fulsome argument against Biden's Israel policy.
My concern is that while Biden is serving this weird NGO gutter college radical rump of what he may think is part of his electoral coalition, but I'm really not sure is all that much. There's something ginger about the way Trump has treated this issue for the last 7 months. He wants to dip his toe in it every now and then, doesn't want to center on it, even though it is the central issue in the world when it comes to foreign policy. And I just think it's interesting to note that that is the case.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with his antagonism now toward Netanyahu.
Personal, right?
His personal
Netanyahu
antagonism.
Congratulated Biden on his victory.
Yeah, and Trump has also added in an interview with, I think, Hugh Hewitt, he mentioned that there was some kind of disagreement or runaround over the Soleimani operation in 2020. But whatever, Trump has grievances against Netanyahu, so that might explain why he's not talking about it, the war, as much as he'd like to. I think, or as much as he ought to. I think Trump may have just given up on the Jewish vote, and some of his comments, which have been kind of just foolish and wrongheaded about American Jews, suggests that he doesn't think that there's an electoral constituency there. Or moreover, in 2016, he focused so intently on winning the pro-Israel vote, which is much larger than the American Jewish community. And he doesn't quite have the same energy toward capturing that vote this time, probably because he already assumes it's with him. And then finally, I'd say people are always talking about the parallels between this year and 1968. Nixon in 1968 was very vague about how we would have peace with honor in Vietnam and wanted to give himself maximum maneuverability when he went into office. I think something similar has been happening here with Trump, where he just very consistently, he does, once he finds a message, he stays with it. His consistent message is, look, the world is a mess, everything is terrible, and none of it would be the case if I were president again. And I think that's a pretty effective message. And of course, raises the question of what Trump will do should he return to office. And there we really just don't know. The best we can tell is that, many of the people who would be involved in the Trump administration are pro-Israel. And we certainly know that, at the very least, more Gazans will not be resettled in the United States in a second Trump administration. We can take that to the bank.
So you just said that he's given up on the Jewish vote, and he may. And in fact, the Jewish vote. Let me just stipulate that the Jewish vote, as an electoral matter, is really not very important anywhere in the United States. Maybe in Pennsylvania now. Florida, I think, is pretty much now a red state. Jewish vote doesn't matter very much there. Jewish vote is too small in New York State to matter. The Jewish vote in Michigan is now smaller than the Arab vote. So the Jewish vote as a way of helping you get elected is not a calculation, as we now know from Biden's behavior, that you necessarily need to think about, though it is something that seems to be of outsized interest to a lot of people. But Jewish influencers and Jewish donors and Jewish institutions, which are, say, nominally, like commentary, 501c3s and can't endorse. But they can have an outsized impact. And I just want to give you one example. So my dear friend Cliff Asness, who runs a hedge fund, and he's a free marketeer, very reliable thinker on conservative matters, particularly leaning toward the libertarian. Is the person who funded, just to give you an example, Jonah Goldberg's chair at the American Enterprise Institute. Cliff was a never Trumper, and has put his money where his mouth is. And I'm going to read you the tweet that he put out last night. I hope I have a lot of street cred here. I tried very hard in time and treasure to get us better choices in this upcoming election. I'm still Team Nikki. But this feckless tool of the far left, run as a centrist again, you walking weekend at Bernie's, now selling out Israel, which is what any responsible country would have to do. Most would do far worse and far, far less horrific circumstances. Most wouldn't risk their young soldiers not to do more damage, is beyond tolerable. I hope Dearborn and the loyalty of spoiled, stupid, malevolent brats are worth it, Joe, as you have me perilously close to the formerly and still kind of unthinkable Trump 2024. He put that out last night at 9:20 p.m. That was about an hour and a half after we found out about what Biden was saying to Aaron Burnett on CNN. And Cliff Asness isn't going to move the needle. But I was hearing all night from Jonah Goldberg was hearing all night from all of us, hearing all night from people who were as reliably anti-Trump. Many of them left the Republican Party in their disgust over Trump, believed that January 6th was an insurrectionary act and that he deserved impeachment and conviction for it and all of that, and that this act last night may be a moment where a formerly unthinkable crossing of the Rubicon is about to start happening. Again, not in terms of electoral power, but in terms of...
But it does have electoral power when you consider that Trump is leading in the election already.
Yes.
He has a narrow lead in this election going into Biden's betrayal of Israel on May 8th, 2024. So if events have a certain momentum over the next 6 months, is that momentum going toward Biden or away from him? And I have to think, as a supporter of Israel, I have to believe that this action must mean people will go away from Biden. And
look,
what other action has yet to occur?
Right. I live in a community of Jews, American Jews, New York City Jews, who are not in substantial political agreement with me, but are Zionists and who were, hit emotionally by October 7th and the aftermath as few things have ever hit them. And what I heard last night, I assume that almost everybody I heard from was a Biden 2020 voter. He is not going to get their vote in November. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to vote for Trump. They're not going to vote for RFK. They're not going to vote. And that is the other calculation politically that you have to think about, which is that Biden has a gigantic enthusiasm problem. And is what he is doing here the kind of thing that is likely to have voters on the fence or voters who don't really like either one of them and worry about Biden's this, but worry about Trump's that and all of that, say the ballots coming in, they could mail it in or they could go on election day to vote for him, to say, I'm sitting this one out. Remember, he only needs like 4 million people to sit this one out to lose this election, maybe. And that has happened in recent history. Barack Obama lost 4 million voters between 2008 and 2012. Now, his margin in 2008 was so huge that he sank from an 8% an 8% margin or 7 to a 4% margin, because those voters didn't go and vote for Romney. They just stayed home. Biden's margin was 4% less. I can't even remember now. I think it was 4%. He doesn't have that much room to give, and he is creating the conditions under which ordinary, normal people are going to say, I don't want to vote for him. And in policy terms, this isn't inflation. Inflation's much worse, or the economic circumstances people feel themselves, much worse issue. But who's enthusiastically going out to vote for Biden because he's screwing Israel? Not even if I'm not even saying you're an evangelical Christian who wouldn't vote for Biden anyway. What enthusiasm does that generate? I am lost at what is going on inside their heads, except I think, as I said yesterday, I wrote a book 30 years ago about a White House that committed political suicide. It happens. People get together and they make really bad decisions and bad choices and respond to things badly and don't handle things well and seem incompetent and foolish and out of touch and out of step. And then they lose elections. George H.W. Bush got dropped 15% in overall vote. He got 53%, 54% in 1988, got 38% in 1992. Weird circumstances, Ross Perot, other things. Nonetheless, that happened to him. That was, I don't know what that was, 7 elections ago or something like that. That's not that long ago. Could Biden be making dumb ass moves that are harmful and deleterious to him while we sit around saying, well, they really must know what they're doing? Maybe they don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're committing world historical errors that people will laugh at them about in generations to come. Certainly they are making errors, or he is making an error that will make people feel, many people in the judgment of history feel, that he was somebody who not only didn't rise to the moral moment, but who fell, collapsed morally when he was in his dotage.
I want to add one more thing to this.
Please.
I know Biden thinks he's appeasing the pro-Hamas crowd here. He has just thrown an untold source of fuel on their fire, because now they think they are having an effect. They are these nothings on campuses. They think that they are now projecting their power and opinions onto world events through the White House, and they are going to redouble their efforts. They are going to keep going. They are going to, as they say, escalate for Palestine. And he has now ensured that not that they were going to stop before, but that this thing is going to grow beyond the proportions that we had previously thought about.
Right, just as he has ensured that Israel is going into Rafah with all guns.
Absolutely.
So even in attempting to affect an outcome that he wishes, he is now causing both domestic and international strife for himself, entirely self-generated. It is pretty remarkable. Okay, I'm up with a commentary recommends, and I'm not going to claim here that this is not something deeply close and personal to my heart. I am going to recommend to you a new podcast that debuts today called Israel Undiplomatic, being released by the Jewish News Syndicate. The hosts of the podcast are Ambassador Mark Regev, a longtime Israeli official, and Ruthie Bloom, the columnist, 35-year columnist history in Israel, who also happens to be my sister and is a columnist with the Jewish News Syndicate. They are starting the podcast today. If you go to jns.org, I think you can find it there, or maybe you can find it just in Apple Podcasts. I don't know that it's quite hit yet, but it's Israel Undiplomatic with Ruthie Bloom and Mark Regev. Please check it out. And we will be back tomorrow. So for Christine, Abe, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.